Today is May 10th, 2023, and we're here in the Tualatin Heritage Center in Tualatin, Oregon. My name is Sandra Lafke-Carlson. I'm here with Mike Lofton, and we are here to record the oral history of April Wicker, who currently lives in Tualatin and has lived in Tualatin years ago. So, April, thank you for being here. And would you start by telling us where you were born and where you grew up?
Sure. I was born in Portland, Oregon, but I grew up in Lake Grove at the end of Lake Forest Boulevard. My parents bought a 1-acre piece of property, and my dad and my grandfather built the house that my mother and I moved into. And we lived there for, from 52 until 62, so 10 years. And in that time, they built I-5 and encroached on our property, and we decided it was time to move. So we found some property in Tualatin, and we moved to Tualatin and became Tualatin residents.
About what area of Tualatin did you live in that time?
At that time, we had property that it was an unnamed road when we moved there. It became 80th Avenue, and it's near the corner of Sagart and Martinazzi. And today, there's not a road there, but there is a pathway, and you can walk down to where our home was.
Okay. And who was in your family? Your parents and you? And did you have any siblings?
I have 2 younger sisters and a younger brother, and my parents, and about 75% of the time my grandmother lived with us, my mom's mom. Mm-hmm. But she liked to switch back and forth between her 2 daughters, so she mostly liked to live with us. But my mother was born in the Dalles, so she's a native Oregonian.
Oh, uh-huh.
My dad was born in St. Helens, so he's a native Oregonian.
Okay.
All of my grandparents, all 4 of them, were born before 1900. So my family structure was much older people who grew up with people who lived through the Depression and all of that, both wars. So we had a lot of history and cautionary tales as we were growing up.
Oh yeah, what experiences they had.
Yes.
And had your grandparents come to Oregon also?
My father's mother was born in Washington State, so she lived nearby. My father's grandfather is from Illinois, so all of his kids moved out to Oregon, and my grandfather was one of them. And then on my mother's side, they've been Oregonians since the late 1850s. And they mostly farmed in the Dalles.
Okay.
So they were wheat farmers and sheep ranchers.
Okay. So your roots go pretty deep in Oregon.
They do. I like that because I feel like it's really home.
Mm-hmm. And so did your extended family get together often, or what were some of the activities they liked to do together?
We traveled to and from the Dalles quite often. The family that lived in the Dalles, my mother and my grandmother were close to, and so we visited there quite often. They had a ranch that we'd go out to the ranch.
Was that fun as a child?
It was interesting because there were chickens running around and there were dogs that we'd never seen before, and it was very ranch-like. It wasn't, and it was strange to us, but we had cousins that we liked and played with, and so it was good. We enjoyed it. One of the things, though, that stemmed from that from my mom growing up in the Dalles and being a farm family or ranch family. One of the things that we did as kids was pick huckleberries on Mount Adams because my mom had grown up doing that. So that was a very, I think it was one of the best parts of our early childhood is going camping with my family in the parks and the restricted areas on Mount Adams where we could go and pick huckleberries. So we did that almost every summer. As a child, that's the only vacation we ever had was the week we spent at Mount Adams.
And and what were some of your other, what were some of your interests or hobbies when you were growing up?
Until I became aware of and joined the Civil Air Patrol, I really don't recall any specific things. You know, I had friends and we'd ride bikes and we'd build little towns in the garden, but you know, nothing real specific. It was when I was 13 and joined Civil Air Patrol that I really got an interest in things bigger than just the household.
What is the Civil Air Patrol?
Civil Air Patrol is an auxiliary of the Air Force. It's a civilian organization that does search and rescue, teaches aviation and aviation subjects to young people, teenagers mostly. And at the time I started, we still had a strong, what they called, no, they had a specific phrase for it, but essentially it was moral ethics kind of training. And that was led by a chaplain. So we had all that training, and then we'd do things like go out on search and rescue missions, and the cadets weren't allowed to fly on search and rescue missions because those were actual military-sponsored activities. So we weren't allowed to fly then, but outside of an actual search and rescue mission, we would be able to fly with the older pilots and learn about being able to fly and how to navigate and how to read the weather and what certain clouds looked like. And then we'd learn about how airplane engines worked and the characteristics of different wing shapes. And you know, it was just a complete aviation learning experience. Plus we learned military history, Air Force specifically. And a lot of our steps, awards to move up in ranks were named after famous World War I, World War II aviators. Mitchell, Goddard, Earhart, you know, as you moved up, you got these different awards. And I got to the next to the top on cadet ranks before I got married. And once you get married, you have to be a senior member. And that's usually after you're age 18 or 21. Today's Civil Air Patrol is structured just a little bit differently. It's not as controlled by the Air Force as it was back when I was in. Back when I was in, we had an actual Air Force person who was in charge of the whole organization in Oregon. And I'm not sure they do that anymore.
Okay. And you had, in your family, there was some military background or occupation?
Yes, my dad spent 9 years in the Navy, and he joined way before World War II. He wanted to get away, you know, he wanted to go someplace. So he joined the Navy, spent 4 years in the Navy, and then the war started and he had to go back. So he spent a total of 9 years in the Navy. My mom joined the Coast Guard. She wanted to be a Marine, but the Marines didn't take her, so she joined the Coast Guard.
Okay.
I'm glad she joined the Coast Guard. I think it was better.
Going back a little bit to your school days,
Yeah.
you did go to school here in Tualatin for a couple of years in elementary.
At the elementary school, I went through 5th and 6th grade here,
Okay.
and then went to Tualatin Junior High, and then Tigard High School.
Okay.
Mhm.
And what were your what are some of your memories about memorable teachers or subjects or things you enjoyed?
I totally remember Mrs. Yeager in 5th grade. She made us memorize Christmas carols, and we had to stand up and recite the Christmas carols. This was to prepare for the Christmas program each year, right?
Uh-huh.
And I still remember those.
I remember her too. She was my 5th grade teacher.
Was she?
She was big on spelling. Remember, we had a spelling bee.
Yeah, I remember the memorizing. that memorizing spelling, the Christmas carols, your times tables. There was something. Oh, we did in 5th grade. We did a centennial program where we wrote and performed a poem about the early days of Oregon as part of the centennial program.
Mm-hmm.
So that was another thing she made us memorize. And then for 6th grade, I had Mrs. Stickrod. And the biggest thing I remember about her is her name, because I always thought it was so funny to have a name that was just the same thing repeated, but with different words. Stick, rod. Yeah, okay. But then one of my classmates was Bill Fewless.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, his name is two of the same thing repeated, few and less.
I never thought about that.
But 6th grade was cool because my mom had put me in a by mail program where every month they send the youngster a little package of things from around the world. And one of the things I got in my little package was a game with cowrie shells, little seashells,
Mm-hmm.
about that big.
Mm-hmm.
And I read through it and I thought, oh, this looks kind of fun. It's kind of like jacks, but no ball. It's the same kind of concept. You pick up the shells that are one way up, and I took it to school and I started showing it to my classmates. And before I knew it, we had a whole tournament going. We had, the brackets all laid out and who beat whom, and we'd play every recess on the front steps.
Oh.
That was one of the funnest things about 6th grade was those cowrie shells.
Were you living here, or you were somewhere when the October 12th storm happened? Did you have any memory of that?
We were living on Avery when that happened.
That was
My
in
dad
19
was stuck at work, and my mom and my grandmother and us 4 kids were at home. And we were living in a shack practically. It was like a 1920s built house. It didn't really have a foundation other than some logs under the under the floorboards. And we had a big, huge fir tree right out in our front yard. And we huddled in one of the bedrooms to the north of, the storm was coming from the south, and we went to the northernmost bedroom, and we all huddled in there with flashlights and no electricity and no way to reach my dad because he was stuck in Portland. And that was a very scary couple of hours for us kids. It made a big impression on us.
But the house held.
The house held. We lost a few shingles, I think, but that was it. And the tree didn't fall down, which was amazing. Especially when you see the pictures of other parts of the area with the tree roots all sticking up in the air. And we look at ours and think, why did ours stay up? We were lucky though.
Yeah. And your dad eventually made it home?
He did. Probably, it was after dark. It was probably around 8 or 9 o'clock at night when he finally got home. But he said that the freeways were all littered with debris and stuff that had been left behind. So it took him a while to get home. But yeah, that's one of those things that you never forget.
Did you live through any of the floods, the Tualatin River floods?
We worked on, what year was it? It was 70-something, early 70s when we had the first really bad flood that flooded downtown and everything. We worked on sandbags then as part of Civil Air Patrol. The Civil Air Patrol squadron got together and we filled and placed sandbags. Yeah, that was before we moved our squadron to Tualatin. So that was, you know, it's just a very vague memory to me because I'd already, I think I was engaged elsewhere. I didn't actually do any of the work, but I know my mom, my dad, my brother and sisters, they were all down there. And for some reason I wasn't there, but I remember it very vividly. And then the one in the 90s, 96 was the year before we moved back after our military service. So I didn't experience that one. There was an earthquake. Do you recall the earthquake in, it would have been 60, probably 63, maybe 63 or 64.
Well, I wasn't living here then. I think I was in college, so. But there was one that you felt.
Yes, it was quite strong. My parents were at a PTA meeting at the grade school when it happened, and us kids were home alone, probably with our grandmother, and they come rushing home to see what had been damaged, and there wasn't any damage. It was weird.
You had felt it though?
Yeah, we felt it. It lasted a good 25 seconds of shaking. So it was a big earthquake. And I know that there were some building facades in Tualatin that were damaged, but I think it was at the school, but I don't recall for sure. But yeah, if anybody else remembers that earthquake, I'd like to share stories about it.
And then in high school, you were involved with the Crawfish Festival.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
One day in high school, I got called to the office, and for no apparent reason, I had no clue why I was being called to the office. And there were some nice ladies there who asked if I wanted to participate in the selection for the next year's Crawfish Festival Princesses. And I said, well, sure, I'd like to do that. And so they held a little interview where they interviewed all the girls who'd said, yeah, okay. And I remember one of the things they asked me was, why do we have a Crawfish Festival? Why should we celebrate it? And at the time I thought, well, because we have something to celebrate. We may be a small town, but we have something to celebrate. We should do that. So apparently it got me on the court. But there was me and Judy Hua, who were selected from Tigard, and then there was a young lady, Leslie Andre, from Sherwood. And we all had to have been students at Tualatin grade school in order to qualify to participate.
Oh, okay.
And so we did that, and we had a few little interviews with people, and then they selected who was going to be on the court.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was the three of us. We had the coronation celebration at the Tualatin grade school.
Mm-hmm.
And Leslie was chosen as the queen for the year. So.
And what were some of the responsibilities that you had, or the duties?
We were to promote the Crawfish Festival. We went to radio stations and did promos. We went to gatherings, like there was a thing where it was like a spaghetti feed, and we went to that. We participated in other towns' parades and festivals, Sherwood, Sheridan, Newburgh, and I think there were a couple others where we, just rode in the parade with our pretty dresses. The best one, though, the best thing that we did, I feel, in that whole year was we participated in what is called Fleet of Flowers. And that was at Depot Bay.
Mm-hmm.
We went out on one of those small little boats out into the ocean just outside Depot Bay and laid flowers. And that was a Memorial Day celebration.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I gave you some pictures from that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we were wearing our pink dresses, and that to me was very moving.
Mm-hmm. That was to memorialize people who had died at sea.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I think they still do that.
Do they?
I hope so. 'Cause
I hope so too, because I thought it was really special.
Yeah. So you graduated from high school, and then where did life take you? Did you go to work? Did you join the military?
I went and talked to a recruiter just before I graduated high school. And at that time, women were very restricted as to what they could do in the military. And I didn't want to be a typist, and I didn't want to be a medical assistant. And that was about all there was available. And so I didn't join. I got married instead,
Mm-hmm.
and moved to Utah. Lived in Ogden, Utah for a year.
Oh, really? Oh.
Decided I couldn't stand him anymore. He went to Korea and I went home. And then I met Pat, my husband.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as it was a week between the end of my divorce and the day Pat and I got married. But we've been together more than 50 years.
Well, yay.
It was worth it. But then after Pat and I got married, he was learning to be an aircraft mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
And he couldn't really find any work because the guys who had military experience were getting the jobs.
Mm-hmm.
rather than taking somebody fresh out of school with no experience. So scratched his head and he says, maybe I need some military experience. So he goes and talks to the recruiter, and they make all the arrangements, and then he calls me up and he says, hey, do you want to join too? Yes. Where do I sign up? So we went to basic training together.
And that was the Air Force?
Air Force, yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
And then where did you move around a lot during that time?
We had a very strange military career. I went to aviation electronics school and then went to McGuire Air Force Base, which is in Wrightstown, New Jersey, right next to Fort Dix. And I worked on C-141 airplane radios. And I really liked it. I liked being out on the flight line and crawling around inside the airplanes and knowing how the radios worked and fixing them. I could actually fix a radio. It didn't work when it came in, and now it works. I fixed it. I really enjoyed that very much. We hated New Jersey. You know, when you're born and raised here in Oregon, the East Coast is it's just not home. You know, it's too hot and humid, and then it's cold and wet, and we weren't happy there. But we loved the Air Force, and we loved what we were doing, so we volunteered to be recruiters. So from New Jersey, we moved to Los Angeles, and we lived in Los Angeles and did recruiting there. And then Pat got the opportunity to go to college on the Air Force's dime. The Air Force would pay for it as long as he took a certain course that they wanted fulfilled, right? So he got a degree in mathematics from UCLA, and the Air Force paid for it. Once he did that, I looked at that and said, there's no reason why I can't do that. So I applied for the program. And I got accepted, and I went to University of Portland and got my degree in electrical engineering with an emphasis in computers. So we both got commissioned, and then spent our last 8 years in the Air Force as officers at Offutt Air Force Base, Omaha, Nebraska. Pat worked for Strategic Air Command, and I worked for Space Command.
And how many years?
8. We were there 8 years. Okay. There's a rule that if you transition from being an enlisted person to an officer, you have to serve at least 8 years as an officer in order to retire as an officer. And we wanted that pay bump. So Pat got transitioned exactly 10 years. So he had 10 years enlisted and 10 years as an officer. I didn't get transitioned till I'd been in 12 and a half years, so I had to do another 8 years. So I was in 6 months longer than Pat was. Makes a huge difference in our retirement, though. So it was worth it.
Yeah.
Again, Omaha, Nebraska is not Oregon. We were happy to be done with our tour of duty and come back home. And then we looked for some place to live, and the area had changed so much in the 20 years we were gone. Things were just so different.
What year did you come back?
We came back in 96. We retired in 94 and came back in we bought our house in 97. So we came back to Tualatin in 97. We were in Boring with my dad for a year before that, looking for some place to live. We looked over the whole area, and it was hard. It was hard to find some place that really suited our needs. But we ended up with a nice little house over in the area by the new Tualatin grade school.
Avery Road.
Yep, Avery, just off Avery.
Yeah. And so you've been here since then. You've raised 3 children?
2.
Okay.
It seems like my grandson, but no. Yeah, we have a son and a daughter. Our daughter was born in New Jersey. Our son was born here when I was stationed here going to University of Portland. So he went to Tualatin High School, the new high school. And you know what's weird? He had teachers who had been teachers when I was at Tigard High School.
Really?
Oh my gosh. I don't remember which one it was now, but one of his, I think an English teacher, was one that was a brand new fresh English teacher when I graduated at Tigard.
Oh. So that was, what, over 20 years?
Mm-hmm.
That teacher had been.
So from 69 to 2000, he graduated in 2000. So that's a lot more than 20 years.
Yeah. Yes.
But yeah, so he feels like Tualatin's home
Oh,
also.
your son?
My son does, yeah, because, you know, he went to high school here.
Yeah, yeah. And so, when you and Pat came back to Tualatin and you retired from the military, so have you been retired since then, or did you do other work?
No, I worked for Burns Brothers up until they closed all the travel stops. And then I didn't have a job there anymore. I worked the company was called Flight Dynamics when I started. And they started in Hillsboro. They were a startup company. They built head-up displays for aircraft. So they hired me as a quality inspector kind of person for the head-up displays.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked there until Rockwell bought them out and it became Rockwell Collins, and I turned 55 and I said I want to retire. So I retired.
Mm-hmm.
Then my daughter wanted to start a business teaching paramedic stuff because that's what she does. She's a paramedic. And so we tried to get a business going, and it's a lot harder than you think.
Really?
So I was looking for something to earn money, and a friend of mine worked at OHSU, and she offered me a temporary job at OHSU. And then I met some people, and when that temporary job was up, they hired me full-time at OHSU. So I worked in the pediatric education department.
Oh, doing what?
My particular area was graduate education. So I made arrangements for the speakers that came in for the way it works for the students is you're a medical student, you go to, when you complete that, you become a resident, and you're a resident for at least 3 years, and then once you finish your residency, then you're a regular physician, and if the school hires you, you might be a professor or an attending physician, or, you know, a trainer of some kind. So that was that top level that was my responsibility, to make sure they had continuing education, that they were getting the credits they needed to keep their certifications up, to have guest speakers at their level, you know, rather than the basics level.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I did. That was my last job there.
Okay.
For a long time I worked with the people who submit requests for support, like from NIH or other grants or things like that. I worked with them for keeping their certifications up, to make sure that all their results were documented and documented properly in the right format, and that it was reported to whoever the grantor was in the way they wanted it reported. So that was a lot of fine detail work, and that's the kind of thing I really enjoy. You know, the little bits and pieces.
Mm-hmm. And how did you get into quilting?
It's a funny thing. I acquired, when my grandmother passed away, I acquired a box, and in the box were these little bits of fabric that she had hand sewn into a shape known as bow tie. So she had sewn all these little bow tie blocks, and they're only about 4 inches square. They're not very big at all. And I wanted to know, what the heck is this? Where did this come from? And it was explained to me that my great-grandmother started that quilt for me when I was born, but she passed away before she was able to finish it. But I had all these little blocks now. So I wanted to learn how to put it together and make a quilt out of it, because I had all the blocks, and just leave them in a box doesn't seem right. So I took a class, and they taught a pattern, and it had nothing to do with what I wanted to learn, but I was learning the techniques. And then they had another class, and we did a different pattern, and then another class, and it was fun. I enjoyed it. I liked fabric. I'd always been a sewer. Both my grandmothers taught me to sew. And it seemed like there was always something new to do, to learn, to see. And I submitted some of those quilts to the state fair in Nebraska. And I got ribbons. And that was like, wow, that's cool. I like this. So I kept making quilts. I never have finished the one my great-grandmother started. I still have all those little pieces in a box. But that's why I started quilting, was to finish that quilt. Maybe someday I still will.
Yeah.
I hope.
But and you helped, you gave a lot of help to making our quilt show. The first small one in the last fall, and then the bigger one in March, which was a great success.
That was lots of fun. I enjoyed that very much. I enjoyed the older quilts, to see, a lot of the new contemporary quilts are very, all I can say is modernistic. And they're lovely, and it's, I'm glad people like that, but I really like the old-fashioned ones. They're just, when you think about what it took for women to make quilts like that, without, way back when there was no electricity in the home and you had to work by candlelight, right? When you'd already fed the men, slopped the hogs, weeded the garden, killed a snake on your front porch, and then you sit down and quilt. To me, it's just amazing that anything like that ever got done. Yeah. And one of the things we did at that quilt show was we had the Oregon Historical Society bring some old quilts. And they are just beautiful. The materials are fabulous, the patterns are great, the colors, it just amazes me. The modern ones, they're nice, I like them, but they're not the same. Yeah.
Oh, well. And I wanted to ask you, how did you get involved with the Tualatin Historical Society? Because you're a board member now, and you've been a member since last
almost
year.
A year, yeah.
So how did you?
Well, the whole pandemic thing, when we were told we could not go anyplace and we couldn't hang out with people, and I lost all my friends. People moved on. If you can't interact with them, they go do something else. So I was just sitting around thinking, I need to do something. And why did I come here specifically? I'm not really sure why, but...
Was there a program or a speaker?
There might have been. It might have been. And then I met Yvonne Addington. And I remember when I was just a child, my parents talking about local politics, and Yvonne's name came up very often.
Her city manager.
Yeah, in her city manager role. And So I started talking to her, and then I talked to somebody else, and then I talked to someone else, and then I found out you had sewing machines, and I love the sewing machines. So that really got me hooked. And then when Ross suggested we ought to do something with those quilts that you have upstairs, from there it just kind of flourished, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you were a great help.
Thank you.
Knowing about quilting and getting the first hangers, frames to hold the quilts, and just knowing about quilting.
Yeah, I had done, I had helped with a quilt show that we used to do in conjunction with my husband's yearly show. He was with a group of men who made steam engines, models of steam engines. You know, you take a big steam engine from a train, from a farm, from a tractor, and they reduce them down to about 12 inches. And, you know, try to understand how the steam engines worked and recreate it only in miniature. So they had a show every year, but the wives felt left out. They wanted something to do, and most of them were sewers. So we put together a quilt show. So the ladies had something to do while the men were out there with their steam engine models. Yeah, that and I visit almost every quilt show that comes along.
You do.
Yeah, I like to see what's out there. You know, it's a fun day to go out and see what other people have done.
Yeah. They're works of art, some of them.
Some of them are, yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Not mine. Mine are just quilts.
Well, the beautiful one you made for your father, it was on his birthday he had.
I made it because I'd learned how to transfer photographs to fabric. I wanted to make a quilt for him that sort of chronicled his life. He'd just gotten married to my stepmother, and I thought it would be nice to have a quilt where he could show, here's my family, to her family, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I included pictures of his mother and father, his brother and sisters, his brother and sister, their spouses, all of his grandchildren had photos on there, and there's a lot of them, and his children, both as little kids and grown-ups, and a couple of pictures of him in the Navy and in Civil Air Patrol. And all of a sudden I realized I had this huge, to me it seemed huge at the time, quilt with all these pictures on it. And he loved it. He thought it was just fabulous. So that made me happy. But I gave it to him for his 85th birthday, I think it was. He would have been 85. Yeah, he was 85 in 2000.
And when he saw it, he said,
It's my life. So I hadn't named it before then, but that's the label I put on it. It's my life. Yeah.
Well, that's all the questions that I think I have. But is there anything else you want to share?
There was one thing that I wanted to tell you about that was very important to me as a school kid. I was in band. When I started 5th grade at Tualatin Elementary, the band teacher came in and recruited. He wanted new band members. I'd never played an instrument before. I had no idea. But he did one thing, and if I'm right, I think his name was Mr. Bell. But
Yes.
was it?
Mr. Bell taught band at the junior high, and I took band for 2 years there, played the clarinet.
Yeah.
So probably the same.
I'm thinking it was. He kind of had an audition. He got the kids who wanted to play an instrument, he got them together, and we got to try all the different instruments. And I think he needed a trombone player. So he decided I was good at trombone. But yeah, I learned to play the trombone, played it all the way through high school. And those are some of the best high school memories, is in band, in stage band, in marching band, in pep band. You know, it just was everything. And my best friends were the trombone section, which were all guys. There was me and all the guys. We marched in the Rose Festival Parade. It was in high school, so it had to have been 9, 8, 7. It had to have been 67. We marched in the Rose Festival Parade. Tigard was less than 5,000 people at that time, so we fit into a separate category of bands. And I marched in the front row, and because I was in the front row, my band teacher, Mr. Powell, said I had to wear trousers to march in the front row. He didn't want a girl, obviously, in the front row of his band.
Oh, really? Oh.
Well, my knees would have been hanging out. He didn't want he didn't want his front row broken up. He wanted the trombones in the front row, because one of the things we played was Hold That Tiger. And we all learned to make that growl sound with our horns. And so he put us in the front row. That was a fabulous experience. As far as I remember, we only did that one year. And then he formed a stage band, and we played big band music. In the Mood, String of Pearls, Tuxedo Junction, you know, that era. And we played all over the area, so we had lots of gigs. But again, it was me and the guys. I was the only female in the group. So
in the trombone section,
in the whole
band,
the whole stage band, until my friend Linda Campstra, she played clarinet too, and she played at least 1 year in the stage band. But the rest of the time it was just me and the guys.
Well, good for you.
So, yeah, I think those were the best parts of high school for me, was band.
Oh, yeah. I bet that was fun.
Yeah.
Challenging, though, to play a trombone and march at the same time.
It is, yeah. Yeah, and I managed to, I like to practice, so I was a little bit better than the rest of the trombone section. So I was always first or maybe second chair. Once in a while the other guy would beat me out, but most of the time I was first chair. So.
Do you still play? You still have a trombone?
I still have my trombone, the very same one. I quit playing when I got braces on my teeth, and I got braces when we moved back here because the Air Force won't pay for that. So once I got out, I had the money, I got braces and got my teeth straightened, and I couldn't play while I had the braces in my mouth. And so I never picked it up again after I got my braces off. Yeah, I have too many other things to do, like make quilts.
Oh, well, this has been a delight. Thank you so much, April.
Yeah, it's fun reliving some of those memories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Telling us your stories.
Yeah.
Thank
You're
you
welcome.
very much.
You're welcome.